Hey guys, Marcy here. In today's video, I want to mainly rant about the state of hunters inside of PvE. And yes, I understand that you can very obviously clear pretty much any content in this game with any class, on any subclass. It's just dependent on how much effort you want to put in. Generally speaking, hunter unfortunately has to put in the most amount of effort for the least amount of gain, at least compared to the other two classes. And before anyone mentions that this is a hunter complaining, I am a warlock main. Hunter is my least played class. I have well over a few thousand hours on Warlock alone. I don't want to tell you the exact number, I'll let you figure that out on your own. So I want to quickly go over the passives of each class as well as the class abilities of each class. So starting with Warlock, they have 10% increased grenade regen speed as well as 5% increased grenade damage. The Titan's passive, it is arguably the least interesting, but they have 20% increased basic melee damage, not powered melee, just basic melee damage. And hunters have increased sprint speed and a slightly faster weapon swap and stow speed, and their baseline mobility is 100, which sounds like a lot, but the only relevant thing here is going to be the slightly faster, I believe it's 10% increased weapon swap slash stow speed, which generally speaking isn't really going to be used a whole lot, but it can make weapons feel a little bit better, admittedly. We go over the class abilities for warlocks. Empowering Rift grants 20% increased damage, 260 additional base grenade and melee, and 230 additional base class regen rate whenever you're standing in the Empowering Rift, as well as giving you a 15% ammo generation multiplier. The Healing Rift, I don't need to tell you how good that is, same with Phoenix Dive. Their healing in any game is going to be broken. It is by far the most generally applicable, but Empowering Rift, if you are able to sustain yourself without Phoenix Dive or Healing Rift, is by far and away arguably the strongest class ability in the game for actually making an impact on your gameplay. Going over to Titan's class abilities, I'm just going to highlight the one I think is the best, and it's going to be Rally Barricade, to no one's surprise. Now, Rally Barricade, what it does is it will grant you 80% damage resist to splash damage from combatants whenever you are standing behind the Rally Barricade. On top of the fact that it also, in quotes, taunts enemies, which basically just pulls their aggro to shoot at the barricade instead of you. It also grants plus 30 stability, plus 100 reload speed, as well as 10% faster reload speed and 10% increased damage fall off distance, as well as 50% flinch resistance. Realistically speaking, the only thing you're really going to notice is maybe the stability, the reload speed, and the reload multiplier. In my opinion, Rally Barricade is arguably better than Healing Rift, as I consider it a equivalent to Healing Rift for Titans, as it's very flexible and has a lot of aspects tied to it. Now, one thing you will notice is that both Warlock and Titan class abilities will not only buff the individual user, generally speaking, there's some exceptions of course, namely Thruster for Titan, but they are able to be applied to the entire team as well. Now, the issue with Hunter's class abilities is they are solely dependent on just the Hunter. Now, obviously, there's some exceptions, whether it be aspects or even acrobatics dodge, which is just a worse Empowering Rift in my opinion. Team play is a very big drawback for Hunter. There's very little team synergy or team support that you can have, unlike Warlock and Titan, where even their class ability is at a bare minimum able to affect multiple people. Going over to Hunter's class abilities, Hunters have acrobatic dodge, which is just radiant for 10 seconds. Gambler's dodge, which is a stat check, and Marksman's dodge, which is arguably the most flexible but also least useful in my opinion, weirdly enough, as yes, you can make it work in some damage rotations. Generally speaking, it's not really worth it, as well as the fact that it picks up ammo that you probably want to save. Acrobatics dodge is just a worse version of Empowering Rift ever since Radiant got its 5% nerf, which yes, it's not a lot, but 5% is still 5, and that is something that Acrobatic Dodge just ended up losing. So it being identical in terms of a damage buff to Empowering Rift, with the only real benefit being anti-barrier rounds, isn't enough. And Gambler's Dodge is just a stat check of whether or not you have the right melee stat number in order to actually make it function, which in my opinion is just not really the best design. I think it's very poor, but we'll get into that later. To quickly skim over the top 3 supers for each class in my opinion, I will just quickly list them out. I will assume that you're comfortable enough with the game to understand why each one is picked. So starting with Warlock, they have Well of Radiance, Song of Flame with either Nova Bomb or Needle Storm as their top 3 supers. Knight has Thunder Crash, Blade Fury, specifically the Strand version, and either Glacial Quake or Twilight Arsenal depending on the situation. Hunter has Mobius Quiver, Deadfall, or Marksman Golden Gun, which, just as a friendly reminder, does less damage if you have someone on the team using Bootsy the Assembler, as the Blessing of the Sky buff that you get from Boots will override Radiant, therefore making Golden Gun do effectively less damage than intended. So the fix that they recently gave Well of Radiance and Golden Gun's interaction basically doesn't matter. To quickly go over the top 3 aspects in my opinion for each class, Warlock has Feed the Void, Bleak Watcher, and Weaver's Call. Knight has Banner of War, Storm's Keep, and either Knockout or, in my opinion, Controlled Demo depending on the situation, as you are functionally immortal. With either of these, it just depends on whether or not you want that immortality to spread to the rest of the team. Hunter has On Your Mark, Ascension, and maybe Stylish Executioner. Not really sure what to pick for the third, as they're all kind of mediocre to be honest. Warlock's aspects across the board are ridiculously strong. Even Warlock's weakest subclass, which is Stasis, has arguably the best utility aspect in the entire game, with the other aspect slot either enhancing Bleak Watcher or enhancing the individual's power. Feed the Void is so unbelievably strong that people will refuse to play Prismatic without it, and Weaver's Call, due to the buffs that it's received over the years, has made it very, very strong, not only for neutral but class ability centric builds that will abuse things like Dynamo. Titans is definitely more team dependent, but overall still very strong. These in particular are just the standout ones that are the reason people pick this class. Banner of War, historically speaking, has been one of the biggest reasons to play Titan as a whole. Storm's Keep, while it has fallen off a bit, is still very strong, as you are not having to change pretty much anything to get decent value out of it. Knockout hard carries Prismatic Titan, and Controlled Demo is just a team-wide version of that, which also works for one of the best roam perks in the game, which would be destabilizing rounds. Hunter's only real good aspect providing something you absolutely cannot get with the other classes will be On Your Mark, and that's just a worse version of Arc Souls on Arc Lock because it's just not enough of a damage buff to warrant it, and the healing you get from it is only specific to the Hunter themselves rather than the entire team. Ascension is just a worse version of Knockout, Lightning Surge, and even Getaway Artist to an extent. It is literally giving you one of the easiest to obtain buffs in the game, which is also just acquired through the Praxic Blade with its Catalyst. And yes, while it can jolt, that is a objectively worse version of Getaway Artist. Stylish is Hunter's most consistent way to gain Invis, but Invis is borderline useless in most situations, and the only reason I considered it a top 3 aspect is because of the melee damage buff it grants. While all that was a mouthful, I'm going to very quickly cover the 5 main build archetypes in the game for each class, some obviously having more options than others. Starting with melee builds and their paired exotic, Warlock has Lightning Surge with Winter's Guile. Titans have either Banner of War, Consecration, or Baby Hammer with Worm Gods or Synthos. Hunters have Combination Blow, which they've had for 6 years mind you, with either Grapple Melee using Synthos or Tempest Strike with Gifted, or even Mask of Fealty on Prismatic. Going over the best grenade, Warlocks have Getaway Artist or literally any Void Grenade build, excluding the bug with Handheld Supernova. Other subclasses have Verity's Brow. I will assume you know why that's good. Titans have either Heart of Inmost Light or Armamentarium with Touch of Thunderstorm nades or Pulse Grenades, or Ashen Wake with Fusions. Hunters have Moth Keepers, I guess. That's pretty much it. Lucky Raspberry is not really good. In fact, I think it's terrible since the rework they gave it. Moving on to weapon-focused builds, Warlocks have Rain of Fire, Sanguine Alchemy, or Cenotaph Mask, which admittedly is more of a support exotic, but that's besides the point. Titans have Peacekeepers, Actium War Rig, or I guess Hazardous, or maybe Strongholds, depending on the situation, as the buffs that it grants those specific weapon archetypes are very strong. And Hunters have Lucky Pants or Fortune's Favor. To go over the super focused exotics, Warlocks have Metiodoxia, Apotheosis Veil, and depending on who you ask, either Geomag Stabilizers or Stormdancer's Brace. Titans have Cuirass, Syntheseps, or Pyrogale. Hunters have Celestial, Star Eater, and I guess Raiden Flux. Orpheus can technically be slotted here, though for the build that you would use it for, Fortune's Favor is just a better pick, generally speaking. For the best support builds, Warlocks have Boots of the Assembler or Speaker Sight, Titans have Crest of Alpha Lupi or Precious Scars, and Hunters have Omnioculus or Renewal Grasp. Taking a look at everything I just listed, the only time Hunter actually stands out above the rest is going to be with Lucky Pants, Combo Blow Grapple, or Fortune's Favor, Mobius Quiver. And I'm not sure if you noticed, but 2 of these in the most recent contest dungeon were basically unusable as they disabled Navigator because they don't know how to code properly, and Lucky Pants had Uncivil Discourse taken away from it because it was as good as they were told it was going to be by Aegis and left it unchanged for some reason. Fortune's Favor is realistically speaking going to be the most consistent in quotes best exotic Hunter has because it doesn't limit you to one exclusive setup like the others do, and it's also not extremely annoying to make work, like Combo Blow is. Unfortunately, it is also just a worse version of Sanguine Alchemy in regards to being a damage buff, so make of that what you will. Given that we're in the era of not swap being a thing going forward in contest experiences, Hunters' thing that they have relied on for every single contest experience prior to not swap was the fact that they could do loadout swaps to remain competitive. Now that they can't do that, it's become increasingly harder to justify Hunter over the other 2 classes, especially Warlocks, given we have Well of Radiance and Boots of the Assembler being the single best win condition in the entire game. You do not go into any contest content without a well, and you're lying if you say otherwise. Sadly, Mobius Quiver can only really function with 1 to 2 people, due to the nature of Witherhoard and Area Denials not allowing damage over time effects to work with more than 1 person. And while it is very good, it is also exclusively meant for boss damage. So your neutral game is kind of lacking since you're forced onto a subclass that has essentially no melee ability and no offensive grenades. Going over to Combo Blow Hunters, the reason I think this is actually balanced and should not be nerfed is because the amount of hoops you have to jump through to make it work, let alone worth using, is by far and away the single thing keeping this build in check. If you take a look at the other 2 classes' best builds, they don't have to really change anything about their playstyle, and they are generally speaking much more flexible in their options. Getaway Artist in particular is something I will directly call out as being the most brain-dead but effective build in the entire game. It requires almost no setup and is pretty much guaranteed to work in every piece of content in this game. Grapple Hunters are the best example of a risk to reward build, and for that reason alone I think it should remain unchanged, despite how strong it can be. Looping back over to Fortune's Favor, the reason it is a worse version of Sanguine Alchemy, despite the fact that it stacks with every damage buff in the game, is because Sanguine Alchemy gives 4 times surges on top of a universal 10% damage increase for every single source of damage you do. It's not just limited to weapons. Fortune's Favor only buffs your weapons. And Sanguine, since it buffs all of your abilities, including buddies and your super, leads it to being a higher overall damage buff than Fortune's Favor, and just as a reminder, Sanguine is arguably the worst, in quotes, relevant exotic on Warlock. As we move on from this section, we're going to talk about the general power of abilities on Hunter, which they might as well not even have them, to be honest. Hunter's melee abilities, by far and away, are the weakest of the bunch, with Tempest Strike and Combo Blow being the standout, while every single melee is good utility, Smoke Bombs and Threaded Spike being the standouts here. In terms of actually killing things, they are the worst to do that specific job. Smoke Bomb is a very consistent way to get one of the easiest to apply debuffs in the game, and Threaded Spike feeds into itself while applying a pretty strong debuff to the enemy. The issue with them, however, is not their utility, it's more so the fact that their offensive power is very lacking. And there's no real need to apply a debuff when you can have a melee that can just outright one-shot. Hunters don't have easy access to room-clearing melees like the other 2 classes do, and the only one they do have requires a stat commitment that's just very annoying to meet, which is a perfect segue into the next point I want to make with Hunters, the stat requirements. If you don't play Hunter, the stat requirements are the most annoying parts about Hunter. They are the most stat-hungry class, requiring specific thresholds for certain things to even function, like Gambler's Dodge requiring, I believe it's 55 melee to get your full melee refund to work when close to enemies, and the class stat needing to be 70 to refund your dodge on combination blow. While you can argue Hunter is always going to be above 100 melee stat anyways with these builds, the counterpoint to that is that combo blow on Prismatic, specifically with grapple melee, benefits way more from the grenade stat than it does the melee stat. So with Hunter's arguably best setups, you have to commit to 3 different stats to make the build even function, let alone be good, and 4 stat commitments if you count the super stat. Because of both the stat requirement and general power of abilities, Hunter is most reliant on their weapons, but also has the least amount of gain from committing to weapon stat. Let me explain. Warlocks can get away without using weapon stat pretty much at all, as the only time it's really benefiting you is in regards to boss damage. Your own setups are so strong that you don't really need to shoot your guns. You can just walk around looking at enemies and they'll fall over. Titans, while not nearly as easy to pull off, is still capable of it. From something like Insurmountable Skull Fort to Consecration to Baby Hammer, you don't need to actually shoot your weapons at all. But wait, how does this make Hunter gain the least from weapon stat if the other 2 classes don't even need to use their weapons? Wouldn't that make them the best? I'm glad you asked. The reason Hunter gains the least from weapons is because weapons themselves are in a pretty rough spot right now. While yes, technically speaking, what I said isn't true, it is paradoxically the reason why Hunters struggle the most. We have seen that historically speaking, builds that are focused on weapons need to be astronomically stronger than ability builds for them to even be considered part of the conversation. Lucky Pants is so reliant on the kind of hand cannon that you use that if any good ones, like on Civil Discourse, are for one reason or another disabled, the entire exotic will not see any play whatsoever. Fortune's Favor only shines as bright as it does because it is quite literally the only thing Hunter has right now. The best weapon focus setup on Hunter is only good in one specific part of the game, which is boss damage, and because of that, the other parts of the game are neglected. Abilities for the other 2 classes have become so strong that in comparison, Hunters feel like they're still stuck in Witch Queen. Having an entire class be almost solely reliant on weapons when weapons have been in need of desperate help is definitely one of the choices made. So then, how do we go about fixing Hunters to feel as good to play as the other 2 classes? While this is not at all my place to speak, as I am not on the balancing team, I want to at least spark a discussion. To give credit where it's due, the tether buffs have shown the potential of Hunter quite a bit, and On Your Mark was a very good start, despite the bugs it had on launch. For the first change I'd like to see, this is a minor one, it would be for On Your Mark to not only provide cure to allies who have 10 stacks of it, I'd like it to also periodically grant cure to everyone surrounding the Hunter whenever the Hunter is dealing sustained damage. This just makes it similar to Crest of Afalupi while having the added benefits of granting the weapon stat. Secondly, across the board, Hunter melees need to either do more damage or they need to have more options for melees. Void Hunter feels awful because you basically don't have a melee, and Void Grenades are inherently weaker than the other subclasses at a baseline. How much of a damage buff will depend on the melee, but I personally think this is a good start. Obviously, we can exclude Combination Blow from the equation. For the third change, I strongly believe that the stat requirement for Hunters needs to go. Having to commit to upwards of 4 stats to be comparable to the other classes is just ridiculous, and the only reason it's like this is because of PvP, which you can guess why that's not a good thing. For the fourth change, this is technically speaking multiple changes in one. I'd love to see Hunter's options of good exotics actually be expanded on. Fortune's Favor is a very, very good start, but I'm mainly referring to reworks or buffs as a whole. You guys remember Shinobu's Vow? Yeah, I don't either. Expanding the options of viable exotics would help this class not be railroaded into 1 or 2 archetypes of builds. Having the flexibility on a class is the single best thing a class can have, and it's the reason why Warlocks are so overtuned right now. They have at least one very dominant build or exotic in every single archetype of the game, and while they may fall short of being the best, they're so good at being whatever you would want that it almost doesn't really matter if they aren't the best. Warlock's weakest archetype, weapon-focused setups, are arguably the one thing hunters should be best at anyways. For the 5th change, I want to see more support-oriented aspects or exotics to make them actually worth using. On Your Mark is a good start, but we can expand on it, and the Deadfall tether change to make it a 35% debuff is also good, but not good enough to pick it over Tractor Cannon, sadly. Giving it something as simple as Darkness Aligned damage is granted a slightly higher damage debuff, which for this proposal would simply be 5% higher than normal tether, making it a 40% debuff for darkness damage, could go a very long way in team compositions, though I will admit this can very quickly spiral out of control with certain setups. Mainly you, Behemoth Titan. Going over to Stasis, imagine if something like Shatter Dive could grant Frost Armor to not only yourself, but allies as well. That way Stasis has at least some extra survivability across the board, without being tied to exclusively Renewal Grasp. For Strand, I would like to see the Suspend Dive grant Woven Mail to not only the Hunter, but people surrounding the Hunter as well, as people who love Strand Hunter will simply get a indirect buff, and given that Warlocks are able to grant Woven Mail to the entire team through Weavewalk, I don't think this is going to break the sandbox personally. As for the final suggestion, I would like to leave it up to you guys. Obviously, I cannot reasonably cover every single basis or changes, but I would like to hear what your guys' ideas are. The only request that I have is for you to try and keep things a little tame, as we don't want to go too crazy with ideas. So please do keep balance as part of the equation, and obviously don't try and kill each other in the comments. While I have obviously left out a few builds that would be considered outliers, like Hoyle Sotorachne damage resist stacking, I also don't really consider that a good build, as you're forfeiting pretty much all of your offensive capabilities to be slightly tankier than a Titan sitting behind a rally barricade. With all that being said, that will be it for this video. I know it was pretty short, but if you enjoyed it, a like would be greatly appreciated, and a comment giving me whatever ideas you may have for Hunter changes going forward. I'd like to hear them. If you want to see more than just Destiny videos from me, please leave a sub, as I do plan on testing the waters with other games, as Destiny seems to be going into maintenance mode until the next major update, which has been confirmed to be delayed till I believe June, so now would be the perfect time to try out other games. I do plan on streaming a lot more in the near future over on Twitch, twitch.tv/Marceletta, come stop by, I'd love to have you. While I don't plan to stop playing Destiny or even stop covering it, even though I'm barely getting into the scene, the future of the game is honestly a little shaky, so I'm not really comfortable with becoming a dedicated Destiny creator, though I will almost certainly stick around this scene as I still have a genuine love for the game. With all that being said, that'll be enough rambling from me today. I hope to see you all next time, and may you guys have a good one. Bye bye.